Yeah.
Well, good. Well, listen, thanks for joining us again.
Yep. Thank you.
We love having you. And ladies and gentlemen, this is always a little bit of a unique program for you because Dale's not a lawyer, but he is as astute as they come in terms of risk and mitigating risk. And we work primarily with Dale in the travel risk mitigation space, and his team he's the CEO of Global Guardian, which is a firm you want to become familiar with for the reasons you just heard him talking about. They help businesses throughout the world mitigate risk, but they also have a risk response that we have found is second to none. So Dale, welcome back.
Thank you, sir.
And it's always great to have you. And so, but we have Dale join us at these programs because we think the hospitality industry, restaurants, hotels, etc., are quite behind the times in terms of risk mitigation techniques for their traveling mobile employees. But we also think that we need to hear from Dale regarding domestic threats. And we saw some of the domestic violence that occurred in DC recently and potentially in other capital cities around the country. So we always are interested in Dale's thoughts because trust me when I tell you, he has his finger on the pulse. He's a former Green Beret. He's lived in over 70 countries. He has counseled with so many governments and institutions, there are too many to count and certainly to recite here, but we're always interested in his thoughts and perspective. Dale, let's get to it. Can you start us out? You may have an agenda, but I'll get to that, but I want to hear your thoughts, where we are today, new administration. Have we seen any mitigation in the domestic terrorism threat?
Yep. So great question, Stephen. We, after the Capitol riots, we ended up protecting 6 congressmen and 6 congresswomen and their families. We ended up doing a lot of executive protection at corporate headquarters right here in DC. And, you know, I have ex-FBI on my staff, and we monitor kind of the threat level across this country. And there's a couple of key factors here. One, there is now a spotlight, and this is not intended to be political. It is unimportant to us where you sit politically. We don't care if you're red, you're blue, you're right, you're left, you're independent. None of that really matters to us. The simple fact is, whether you like this next statement or not, is that we have a domestic terrorism issue in this country. And there's no getting around that fact. It is real, it is palatable. And if you watching what occurred at the Capitol didn't validate that fact, and now that the FBI is unraveling all of the pre-planning that has gone on for that attack at the Capitol on the 6th, I don't know what will. Like, I just don't know what other kind of validation would you need that we have a real issue. And in simple terms, and I hate to say this about my own country, and I do have a very non-US centric, what I hopefully is a bit of a global citizen's perspective, if you will. But what I had talked about, you know, a decade ago was young youth around the world being radicalized online, tied to ISIS and terrorism and things like that. I think that same template is being proven right here in the United States now. If you want to live in a world of Q and crazy conspiracy theories, it's now sitting on your phone, it's sitting on your computer, it's all there, and you can just completely immerse yourself in it. And we're seeing the radicalization of parts of our country on both sides, both extreme, right and left, both have problems equally. And ultimately, I think what you're going to see with the new administration is the Department of Justice and the FBI will shine a light on this. What I think we're going to find is we have a much, much, much bigger problem that we might have thought. And you might think, how could this ever happen in America? And my answer to all of you is this. This can happen anywhere because it's the human condition. Nothing more, nothing less. I've seen this in Bosnia. I've seen it in Colombia. I've seen it in Honduras. I've seen it in Venezuela. I've seen it in Afghanistan, Iraq, Bahrain, so on and so forth. It's because of the human condition. It's not the way we're structured, the way our government runs, so on and so forth. So I think that this can happen anywhere. We're just not used to it. We're not used to the light that's being shined down upon it now. And ultimately, the combination of that, and there's some real friction in this country now. I'm 52 years old. I say this a lot. I've never seen the country more at odds with its politics, its sexuality, its race, and its religion. And I believe that. And I think the combination of that combined with COVID, you see the top 35 cities in this country now have murder rates that have spiked, the highest in the history of our country ever since we started recording. And you'll see in Portland right now, 76% increase in murder. Baltimore, 54% increase in murder. Chicago, DC, LA, Dallas, across this country. So when you look at that level of violence combined with the friction that we've all gone through politically in this country, which I think is, again, a bit of a phenomenon. I had not seen that visceral kind of reaction in this country since I've been an adult. I think all of that leads to we're in a different place than we've ever been inside this country. And what that is driving towards is this. We're finding, just like, as you mentioned, Stephen, we're responding to emergency response of insider threats through cyber, people being fired and coming to work and threatening to kill people, active shooter, all of those things are at a pace, in addition to natural disasters, that we've never seen. And I think all of that is mixing into an environment here in the US where businesses are now having to make calculations about their risk and how they're going to protect their brand, their infrastructure, and their people in the same way they would view this as if they were going to a high-risk country outside the United States. And that's the big pivot we're seeing here domestically, is businesses and senior leadership are struggling with having to account for threats, whether it's inside, cyber, kidnapping, ransom, or just violence in general, to protect that brand, the infrastructure, and their people in a way that they would only have fathomed thinking of in those terms for a country like Colombia or Mexico or Bahrain or something like that. So I think that's the big pivot that's going on in this country. And the calculus at the board level and the CEO level is, I now have to account for this risk. And I just didn't think in those terms previously.
Dale, that's insightful and good thinking. I have a question. It just raised when you brought up the potential, the example of an employee calling in and making a threat. What's the first step or two that a business needs to take when that happens? Because I agree with you. I think that's going to become, it's already growing. It's going to be more pervasive because COVID has just done strange things to people, no doubt.
No doubt. So I'm going to answer this from real world. This is a playbook we run quite often. And this has increased exponentially. So a few years ago, our biggest client, which is a global insurance firm, and you can imagine, and I'll start there and move towards today. When people don't get the claim they want, or their insurance doesn't cover something they anticipated it covered, people get angry. And insurance firms, believe it or not, have an enormous amount of threat against them and senior executives. So that's where we started to get into this years ago, because people would show up with guns and threaten the company or target a certain executive off the website and so on and so forth. So that then exponentially has increased since COVID, with so many people being laid off, furloughed, and fired, and just high emotion and people wanting to do damage on the way out, whether that's they're stealing IP, they're selling IP, or physical threat. So here's kind of the playbook, if you will. Number one, we want to have a conversation about who is this person? What did they do? What did they do for you? And what were the circumstances? And then what we want to find out is, the first thing is, are they a keyboard bully? Is this just someone at home, viscerally upset, saying things online that we actually don't believe will turn into a physical threat, right? And there's a lot of ways to determine that. Number two, we're going to geolocate that person for you through their cell phone and through their accounts, and through license plates readers and government systems. We can find out where that person is at in real time. And through credit card scans, I can tell you the last time he filled his car with gas, things like that. So we're going to track that person physically, because You'll have a lot of people making threats from Dallas to an executive in Chicago, and they're saying, I'm outside the door, I'm following you, I've been at your house. And in reality, we have been able to confirm through all of our databases that actually they're sitting in Dallas, Texas, not Chicago. They're not physically there. And then we'll send somebody to put eyes on them at their home or at their apartment or their condo, take photos and confirm they're not there. Then we can identify and confirm that they're not a physical threat, at least not yet. And then we can watch them online. Two, if they are confirmed, they really are there, they really did show up. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to inform that workforce. Everybody's going to be informed within company policy that this happened, this person has threatened us, you need to be on the lookout. And we're physically going to put, in most cases, armed agents to protect that individual that's been threatened or that office as a whole. And we're going to offer to walk people to their cars, and we're going to offer to create a presence. And typically that's a week to 10 days, unless there's a persistent threat against a very specific executive. So to summarize, the first thing we want to do is the due diligence and confirm or deny their physical location to determine, are they a keyboard bully, or is this really, is it in their DNA, or is it feasible that they really could create a direct threat? And lastly, if there is a real physical threat here, to put in real agents, ex-Secret Service, ex-US Marshals, ex-PD that have those skill sets, that know how to deal with those kinds of people. Number one, in de-escalation, and two, if things really did go sideways, you have someone that can actually provide a real protective service, if you will.
Yeah, Dale, that's helpful information. I was struck by the fact you're familiar with the situation we had in Texas, as we were talking earlier, and this group of directors on ERCOT, the Energy Management Group, and a lot of them didn't live in Texas, but their profiles were on the web.
Yep.
And they took them down quickly because, we're all doing a lot of social, we're all getting digital information out there, but it just really takes down a hurdle or two for somebody that wants to do evil.
Yeah. So look, I mentioned after the riots, we protected all these Capitol women or congressmen and congresswomen in addition to their families. We also had clients of ours that are very politically active, and they were being targeted. People were showing up outside their home, outside their residence, protesting their donations to a certain political party. So the bottom line is that at ERCOT, those board members, most of them probably don't live in Dallas. Maybe some do, but several won't. But boy, is it easy to find people's addresses these days, and phone numbers and emails and so on and so forth. It doesn't take much. And if you decide that that firm is the reason for your demise, and you've got flood in your house and you're lost your house, and you've got real issues and you lose your job and blah, 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 all of a sudden the ability again to confirm this is a real threat and then take real action now matters in the world we live in.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, in that vein though, Dale, we're thinking about developing a restaurant. The COVID is going to end. We feel the momentum. We're making plans to expand across a border or two, right? The international franchise capability has been streamlined a bit with master franchise relationships, things like that. We had a program this morning based on Canada. But if you were guiding an organization today that was thinking about expanding internationally, where would you stay away from right now?
Yeah, well, I'll answer that in a couple of brackets, if you will. Number one, this is what I would say. We can give you a read of every country in the world and its threat level. Here's what's different, and businesses haven't quite accounted for yet. For example, I have multiple clients that want to get into Libya. I have multiple clients that want to penetrate Iraq and Syria as they think they're going to open up and stabilize. The bottom line is this: is you're doing those calculations. If there was a country that was considered medium risk prior to COVID, as I opened up with, if the murder rate in the United States is up 35 to 75% in every major city in this country, what do you think the murder rate is happening in places like Colombia, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, Kenya, so on and so forth? The bottom line take is this: if you're thinking about expanding into these markets, you have to assume for the next 2 to 3 years that a country that might have appeared to be medium risk is now high, and several countries that were high risk are now extremely high risk. And the calculus you have to do is, they might look great on paper for acquisition, merger, or just a stand-up of a franchise. The difference is you're going to have to account for dealing with that host nation government, dealing with the direct threats in that neighborhood, an increased level threat crime of robbery and direct threat to your employees and or your clients, and all the security protocol that have to go into being able to operate that business in that higher risk environment, protecting your infrastructure, your people, and then how you communicate. And if you're in Russia, accounting for the cyber threat, if you're in Nigeria, accounting for the direct threat and the different terrorist groups up in the north, if you're in Mexico, dealing with the cartels, what is the read in that city on the cartels, and is there exploitation, and so on and so forth. All those things go into this calculus, because this is not going to be like opening a business in Cleveland, Ohio, right? You're going to have all these other considerations, and they all cost money, and they all create risk for your brand and your infrastructure and people and so on and so forth. So accounting for that is where I find all the time, CFOs come to me and go, Dale, we want to do this, that, and the other thing in Brazil. And I go, okay, well, how are you going to protect that 24 hours a day? And every senior executive you have, in order to get from their home to that business office, now requires an armored vehicle with an armed agent because of where you're operating in Brazil. Calculate that in. Calculate the camera surveillance you're going to be required. Calculate the exponential increase in your exposure and insurance to operate in Sao Paulo, Brazil, so on and so forth. And I think that's what you've really got to go through. And if it still all makes sense, then that's when you pull the trigger and you do it. If you find after you do that calculus that it's not such a great idea and your risk tolerance is not that high, then I think you pause and look for another opportunity.
Real quick, that's very helpful. Real quick, what about China?
So China, the number, I have several clients that operate in China full time. The number one issue you have is, and you're watching the independence of Hong Kong just disappear. You're well aware that China is the number one hacking nation state in the world. In many cases, who knows exactly if Russia or China are the best hackers in the world, and who accounts for more, but they're right there. There's just no getting around it. And understand that you have, a couple of options of operating China. You either accept that the Chinese government have every email, every text, every phone call, and every time you have a board meeting or you visit your operations in China, if you accept and can take the risk that they have everything on you, the minute you put your cell phone down on the counter at the airport, it just scanned everything on your phone or your computer, or there's a listening device in every hotel room and every conference room, and everything you do is now being collected. If that is okay and you can function safely, then great. But if you can't, those risks now become intolerable. So I have a client, one of the largest coffee companies in the world. Their growth plan is tied to China. They have 3 jets. Every time it goes to China, we take all their cell phones away, all their computers away. We have to scan the rooms, the conference room every day. And we know even with that, the minute we clean a room, a hostess can come in, an employee can come in. There is somebody from the government, zeroing in from the building across, listening. Every room is bugged. Like, all of this stuff goes into it. And then we have to clean, they call it a TSCM sweep. We have to sweep their planes for bugs because they're at a Chinese airport. And we know when they get refueled and everything else. This is all part of that calculus, is my point. So you either can operate in that and accept those risks, or you're going to have to create an entire platform to get around all of that and have protocol and policy that don't allow a single executive to ever travel with a company phone, a company email, a computer, so on and so forth. And everything they do, they have to assume is being listened to. So therefore, they need to act appropriately.
We're starting to see the Bourne Identity play out in real time, aren't we? Yeah.
It's very real.
Yeah,
we're now in a perpetual state of cyber conflict forever. Every millisecond of every day, everything is being collected on and actioned on and targeting.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So Dale, let's get granular for just a moment. So I've got a restaurant company, and I'm feeling the momentum. We're
Yep.
getting some vaccines. We're seeing the trend come down.
Yep.
Can I send my people out? Can they travel? Can I go try to sell some franchises in
Yeah.
different cities can I get away from Zoom rooms, right? Are we ready to do that? Can I do it safely and meet my duty of care, that I have to my employees?
Yep. Simple question, complicated answer. I'll start with, in every hemisphere in the world, there are travel corridors, if you've heard that term, meaning if you have infrastructure in Australia, you can travel between Australia and New Zealand openly. No issues on that passport. There's protocol, but it's easy to do. If you're in Europe, there are certain parts of Europe to Europeans that are open with some basic protocol. You can move around and get out and about. If you're in the United States, you can get to the Caribbean, you can get to Mexico, you can get to certain pockets within our hemisphere. That's today. And the next part of this, I'm guessing, no different than the Biden administration, Fauci, any doctor out there, no one really knows when we'll hit herd immunity. If you go to our website, we put out this week that we think by June, no later than July, 50% of the country is immunized or is carrying the antibodies from being sick. And by fall, meaning September, October, we think 70% of the country is immunized or carrying the antibodies. And we have now reached herd immunity. And I think if we're doing that and Europe is following, and the wealthier countries in the Middle East and different parts of the world and different parts of Asia, the richer countries are going to be aligned. Israel and the UAE are the two fastest countries in the world being immunized, and they're going to reach the pinnacle very quickly, and they're going to feel very secure. So my guess is, I'm throwing darts at a dartboard like everybody else, based on the data, is we think we're going to see the world open up materially, at least the wealthier parts of the world, by late summer. And by fall, you're going to see larger corridors, and I think the West in general open up. And here's the issue. You're still going to have poor parts of the world that are behind, and those governments won't be able to create an automated travel passport or vaccination passport, and they won't be able to build the infrastructure to do that. And it might be old school. It might be a test within 72 hours. You have your immunization passport. It's on paper. It's not automated. But slowly but surely, I think this thing will start to open up materially. And we think by fourth quarter, we're at 60%, as high as 70% of pre-COVID travel for at least the corporate clients we have. We have pent-up demand. Everybody's ready to go. We still are doing private missions where possible. And I think, by second, third quarter of 2022, we will be at, 90 to 100% of what we had. Not globally, certainly not globally. I think this entire industry takes 2 to 3 years to truly recover. But the corporate travel that we have and the families we have, we do see them moving out very quickly as we get into fall of this year.
Yeah, and Dale, that's helpful. But even domestic travel poses risks, right? Because I want people to recognize that if you're sending people out on the road and they're getting infected, and then they come back and they infect their families, you potentially have some exposure there. So, Dale, in your opinion, and are you guiding your clients? Are you suggesting that they do those things yet, or are we still suggesting Zoom, virtual, all of that, even domestically?
Yeah. So, and I'll reiterate, maybe I didn't properly.
No, you probably did. Yeah.
We're not there yet, Stephen. Today we're not there, right?
Okay.
And we are not. If a client called in and said, "Should I have a conference next month?" I mean, we had a board meeting in Philadelphia 2 weeks ago with 8 board members for a very large global pharmaceutical firm that's a client. We had to test every single board member twice a day physically for COVID, and we had to spread them all out and all the protocol and everything else. We're still having VTCs, and if you want to do something in person, it's got to be all the standard protocol we've all become used to, with the social distancing, the mask, the testing, the whole deal. We're not there yet. So we are not advising anybody, even domestically, to get out there and start doing this at scale in person. It's just too high risk. We don't think that's going to happen again till summer, late summer, where this really starts to gain confidence and we feel good about it.
Yeah, that's good. Listen, and following up on that, I know you work a lot in the kidnap and ransom space, sadly, but when things do open up, I know things could change, but kind of given your lens right now, we're given just the K, just focusing on the K&R threat. If we can do that in a vacuum, where would we not want to go?
So number one, the two top countries for business travel that we have real issue with. Number one is Mexico. And we just did a webinar 2 weeks ago on this. You can go on the website and watch it. Mexico traditionally is number one or number two in the world. Colombia, Nigeria, India, believe it or not. Most Americans don't realize 2 years ago, India was the fourth highest kidnap and ransom country in the world. People just don't connect India to kidnap and ransom. Now, admittedly, a majority of that kidnapping is local nationals, but it is crossed over. And now you're seeing Westerners being kidnapped in India, and it's a problem. So from a business standpoint, number one and number two for us have been Mexico and India. And then, of course, it's the normal players in the Middle East and places like Nigeria, you would expect it. Parts of Africa, of course. And Colombia for the oil and gas industry has always been a problem. We've had to get people out of Venezuela in the last 2 years. It was crazy. We got them out safely and secure, but it's always a challenge. But we as a firm, and Steve and I've been briefing this for years now with you, we're in our 9th year. We've had, up until this last year, 9 kidnap and ransom cases. And each one of them can last from a week to 3 months, and they're always unique and different. We had our 10th last year, and it was in Mexico. So as you look at that statistically, 5 of 10 of our kidnap and ransom cases where we got our clients back were all in Mexico, and the others were in Africa and the Middle East. So it just, and the assumption is, and here's the key takeaway: if you're either operating in Mexico today or you're going to go in after we start to come out of the COVID bubble here, the assumption has to be, if the kidnap and ransom threat in Mexico was high, when you go for the next 18, 24 months, it's extremely high because people have lost their jobs, the cartels, people have been, even that business is contracted because not enough moving and people have the money they have to buy drugs and so on and so forth. If you're at the lower end of the cartels and you want a quick score and you're an uneducated kid that works for the cartel, this is an easy way. You grab a Westerner, you hold them for kidnap and ransom. It's a great way to make a bunch of money really fast, and they know it. Desperate people do desperate things. Kidnap and ransom is no different.
Yeah, it's not. And they're kind of doing micro ones, right? Where they're just holding you for an hour trying to get a few dollars, $500, whatever it is. So, but Dale, real quick on that topic, because I know people on the call are, they're thinking about, oh my gosh, I was thinking about traveling to Mexico. Are you seeing an uptick in the tourist areas of Mexico, or are they still relatively safe?
No, we've seen a leisure travel with our families and execs going to Dom Rep, St. Bart, St. Martin, Puerto Rico. You can get in, and you can get into Mexico. So we have seen quietly an uptick in Cabo and Acapulco and other places. And the guidance is the same. And you've heard me say this, Stephen, for years. If you can't answer the following question, do not get on the airplane. If I get hurt, if I get sick, if I might find myself in an earthquake or a hurricane, because they happen so often in Mexico and the Caribbean, if I get threatened, I get assaulted, or a family member of mine gets kidnapped, who am I going to call or what am I going to do? If you can't answer that question to each of those categories in 2 seconds, don't go. If you can't answer that question and you know how this is going to unfold and exactly who's going to come get you if you find yourself in one of those situations, you should go. We're not telling you don't go to Mexico. Mexico's bad. That's not the policy. The policy is go to Mexico when you can go and you've got the apparatus in place to instantly deal with one of those problems in case it happens to you.
Yeah, that's great stuff. Dale, we're out of time. Listen, folks, I know I used up all the time, but I'm sorry. But if you do have specific questions for Dale, you can feel free to email him. He's got a terrific team. His contact information is all over the place on our website at Global Guardian. you just can't miss him. And there's great information on his website. So don't hesitate to reach out. They offer extraordinary value and have for a long time. Dale, thank you. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, sir.